And I was so wrong,
Right.
and it's just one of the things I hope to bring to other general counsels. It's really leverage your network, and your network can be so many different things.
The Abstract is brought to you by SpotDraft, an end-to-end contract lifecycle management system that helps high-performing legal teams become 10 times more efficient. If you spend hours every week drafting and reviewing contracts, worrying about being blindsided by renewals, or if you just want to streamline your contracting processes, SpotDraft is the right solution for you. From creating and managing templates and workflows, to tracking approvals, e-signing, and reporting via an AI-powered repository, SpotDraft helps you in every stage of your contracting. And because it should work where you work, it integrates with all the tools your business already uses. SpotDraft is the key that unlocks the potential of your legal team. Make your contracting easier today at SpotDraft.com. What does a former GC who is now an executive recruiter wish that she'd known about how to brand yourself, work with search firms, and negotiate the offer? Today, we are joined on the Abstract by my friend Joelle Khoury, an executive recruiter at Egon Zehnder, one of the world's leading executive search and leadership advisory firms. Before joining Egon, Joelle spent nearly a decade leading the legal functions at a real estate-focused venture capital fund, Fifth Wall, which is very successful, as well as a private investment firm, the Saban Capital Group. Joelle, thanks so much for joining me today on the Abstract.
It's great to be with you, Tyler. My first podcast ever. So really appreciate you taking a chance on this recovering lawyer.
Well, we have a friendly audience, so don't be nervous. A lot of them have been in your shoes, both as a recovering lawyer and also with this being their first podcast they've done. Excited to have you.
I'm in good company then. Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
You are. Before we start talking tactically about what you wish that you'd known when you were a GC, I want the audience to get to know you a little bit, like I have. Tell me about what inspired you to become a lawyer in the first place.
It's a good question, and one I didn't even prepare for. I mean, I think, the best answer is it just made a lot of sense when I was 22 years old, and, I liked English. I liked to argue.
Yeah.
I thought law sounds great. It was a great career choice for a really long time, and I definitely learned a lot from it. I would say that, as I raise my own children, there are lessons learned about how I made that decision I would want to impart on them. But I think overall, even now in this new career, when I think about all the things I'm bringing with me, I have a much deeper appreciation for the education, the journey, and all the people I met along the way.
I guess I neglected to mention it in your introduction, but you did have stints at two big law firms, Gibson, Dunn, and I think you sort of like grew up as a lawyer, and then Cooley. How did you like life at the firm? Like, did you know that you always wanted to go in-house as you were leaving law school, or did that happen more organically?
It's funny. I think so many people go to law school coming out kind of thinking that they'll become a partner. And I think I was kind of part of that group that, was focused on what was that survey with how they ranked the firms? I'm forgetting now.
AM 100 or 500 or something like that.
Totally. And I remember in 2004, it was almost like a badge of honor when you were kind of interviewing with these firms and kind of thinking through their rankings and making decisions like that. I know I'm digressing a little bit, but I feel like in the first few years, that was definitely something that I had my eye on. I really enjoyed the smart people I was working with. I really enjoyed the mentorship at the firms. But it's funny, in 2012, I was part of a group that kind of helped open the Cooley office in Santa Monica.
Oh,
and I think, it was really great. Tech was becoming a thing in LA. It was a wonderful group of attorneys that kind of got together in a Regis office space at first, and then kind of had this beautiful office space on Ocean Avenue. I remember, maybe not on Ocean, but with ocean views that has since, grown tremendously. I think I was really energized in those moments by the build the
Mm-hmm.
smaller group, the, kind of idea of growing an office, building, kind of being part of a strategy and vision. And even more so, I kind of started feeling like, I would do these transactions, I would work on these transactions, but then I wouldn't know what happened, right? You kind of do your deal, you put your closing book
Sure.
in, in a bookshelf, and you kind of wait for the next deal to come. And as I thought more about kind of where I was interested and where I was energized, it was much more around kind of why the business makes decisions, the strategies
Mm-hmm.
of making decisions. And I feel like that was a big impetus. I kind of flirted with the idea of going to business school 5 years into my practice.
Wow, you'd be so
And that,
credentialed.
imagine how many degrees I would have been able to put on a wall at that point. But I realized that, perhaps more education at that stage in my life wasn't necessarily the right path.
Hmm.
And so I ended up finding my way after many years of practice, based on a random recruiting call I got, while I was on maternity leave with my second child, to join, a private capital firm in Los Angeles, which is where I landed I think it was 2014.
Tell us a little bit about that. So first you were at Saban, and then you were at Fifth Wall.
Uh-huh.
Fifth Wall, in particular, experienced sort of incredible growth, both in assets being managed and headcount while you were there. Tell us a little bit about your experiences at those two firms, and maybe even sort of like contrast for our audience how they differed, because they both have, they're both funds, but they have sort of very different business models.
Yes, no, it's a really interesting question. Saban was a family office. I feel like if you were to ask me what was the biggest learning moment for me in the family office world, I think twofold. One, kind of assessing commercial risk. And I think you'd probably hear that from so many outside counsel lawyers who kind of go in-house. It's like learning that skill and learning how to flex that muscle was important.
Mm-hmm.
I had a wonderful mentor, and I'm so grateful to her. She's become a dear friend. And, as you get older, you kind of appreciate those people that invest in you. And she had definitely invested in me. There was a creativity in the family office world where you're kind of not bound by rules and strategies and standards. And I think that kind of enabled me to do many different things that I think at a law firm I would not have been able to do. I mean, typically, at least when I was growing up in the firms, it was, either you're an M&A lawyer or a securities lawyer, an employment lawyer, but, you start to go in-house, and oftentimes you become a real estate lawyer and a films lawyer and a contracts lawyer and a, foundation lawyer. And so I think that, kind of being able to flex those skill set and kind of think more about it being a business partner, as opposed to kind of how I viewed, my role as more providing advice and then stepping out, was the biggest learning moment at Saban. Fifth Wall was a tremendous opportunity. I had no experience with institutional capital. I had no experience with capital raising, and I learned on the job. Very, very high growth environment, very challenging environment, but also a great learning experience as well. There was a massive amount of growth when I was there, working with incredibly smart and talented people, a different vibe, but a fantastic opportunity to finally sit in the general counsel seat, an opportunity to kind of sit at the table and help think through the decision-making process, think through strategy in a way that when I was at the firm and at Saban, I didn't have the opportunity to do as much.
Not the focus of sort of the episode, but since you brought up raising capital and that being a huge learning for you, if folks are out there and maybe they're doing that for the first time, they've joined a Series B, Series C startup, and they're having to do a big capital raise. Any advice for them on like what makes that process go really right, or also like a mistake or two to avoid?
It's a good question, and you didn't even prepare me for this one. But I think, I think the biggest skill to bring to the table in those situations, frankly, tends to be communicating with your internal stakeholders, communicating with your external stakeholders, making sure that you're kind of aligned in the strategy, the vision for success, what the end result should be. and like
Interesting.
making sure that the steps you're taking are in line with that macro strategy. I think oftentimes in high growth environments, when you're going 100 miles an hour and you're trying to get things done, it's often easy to lose sight of the macro. And I think, there will always be a skilled person in a lot of ways who can execute and get it done and get the paperwork together, but kind of thinking through the long-term strategy, thinking through not what's happening tomorrow, but what may happen 6 months from now and a year from now, is a way to kind of get out of the weeds and think a little bit more broadly about where your firm wants to go and what they want out of the capital raise.
Fantastic. See, you can go off script.
I mean, I don't know. I guess it's because I'm so comfortable having known you now for a couple of years. I'm forgetting where this may show.
That's great. In other words, it's not totally tactical, or it's not something you can learn in a book. It's also about sort of the relationships that you have within a company or a fund, or with the investors. How did you know that it was time to leave Fifth Wall? Things were going so well, right? Like when did you decide, hey, it's time for another chapter?
Well, it's what happens when you turn 40, Tyler. I know you've got some time for that. But I have two kids. I have a 10 and 12-year-old. I had practiced for over 15 years. And I just started thinking a little bit more about what success meant to me, what energized me, what I wanted to do with the second half of my career. At a certain point, I mean, it's as simple as it just was time for me to move on and to think, a little bit more about the things that I felt like I really wanted to do, as opposed to, I think, for the first 15 years or so of my career, kind of just getting to that next level of success, whether that was corporate associate, senior associate, director, VP, GC.
Yep.
In a lot of ways, we're almost programmed. And I don't know what the law schools are like from now, but I certainly felt a pressure to kind of go off this linear upward path and have that be kind of the definition of what success meant, right? Yep. And I would measure myself by this linear upward path in law. And I think what happened is you're almost forced sometimes, whether it's your age, whether it's your circumstance in life, whether it's really thinking about your day-to-day and what you're doing in that day-to-day. And you start thinking, I think all of us do. I don't think it's personal to me. I think all of us start thinking through that a little bit more.
You took like a year off or so before joining Egon. What did you do with that time?
What a fun year that was. It was such a fun year. It was the first time in my career, absent maternity leave, that I actually paused. I was one of those people back in the day that went straight from college to law school. So I felt like, again, I was always, as so many of us are, just driving, to the next goal. I went to a lot of conferences. That's how I met you.
Yeah.
I did a lot of walking. I'd put on my tennis shoes, go walking. I have two kids that were growing in front of my eyes. I would spend time with them. I would travel. Honestly, I did a lot of no agenda meetings. I interviewed for fun, right? Not because I wasn't potentially interested in a role, but because I really wanted to take the time to really explore what it was that I felt like I wanted to do next. And I want to underscore something here as I say this. That is certainly a privilege that I had for a year. And it's a privilege that I am so deeply grateful for having. I think all of us in life have the opportunity to make choices, right? When we're educated and we have the privilege of great education, we have the ability to make choices, whether that's, money for time or time for money or, growth for time, whatever those trade-offs are. In that moment, in that year, I made the decision to just choose to live, in a way that was not goal-oriented. Yeah. And I really met some amazing people along the way, and people that I think 15 years ago, I never would have thought would have come to my life in the way they did.
Did you have a finite sort of end date when you were going into this? Like, I'm going to take a year off, or was it more open-ended? Like, when the right opportunity comes along for what I think my next adventure is going to be, I'm going to seize it.
Tyler, I'm not that privileged. No, there was definitely a time limit. I mean, to the day, perhaps not, but I was hoping that within a year, I would figure it out. I mean, I definitely was very keen on continuing my career in some way, shape, or form.
Sure.
And I just wanted to give myself the space to do it. And I was so blessed to have a husband that was incredibly supportive during this period, which I would be remiss not to bring up on this call. But I think at the end of the day, the most fun part was not having an agenda. And for the first time in my life, I did not have an agenda. And I think so many people come to me now, and I know we're going to get to this later, and say things like, this is, where am I going to find my next job? Or I want it to be bigger, or I want it to be better. And it's interesting because I feel like the best advice I can give when asked is just give yourself the opportunity to just really dig deep and think about where your superpowers are and where you want to be.
Yep.
As opposed to just ticking off the next box on your checklist.
One thing that I want to mention here that I learned, and I think I've said it on other episodes where we talk about sort of like moments of transition or when you're in between jobs for 6 months or a year or whatever it is. When I had that experience a couple of years ago, one of the things that was really great for me to see is even if you don't have a company or a sort of brand attached to you, people still want to pick up the phone and talk to you. And I'm sure that you experienced that as well with all the success that you had in your career up to that point. But, I think for those folks out there who might be like, maybe they got laid off or the company went through a transition or they decided that they needed to take 3 months or 6 months off, right? Like people will take your calls because they want to talk to you, not Joelle at Fifth Wall. They want to talk to Joelle. I'm sure that you had that experience too.
That is totally fair. I definitely was deeply appreciative of the people that came out and talked to me when I called. People that I had never met before that just became dear friends over that period. And it's funny. I know I'm looking ahead again, but one of my dearest friends that I met during that period became such a huge supporter. And, in a lot of ways, I think in my prior life, I would have thought to myself, you know what? She's a general counsel like I am. She's also looking for her next opportunity. Perhaps that's not the right place to kind of hope that something may come from the relationship that's work related. And I was so wrong, and it's just one of the things I hope to bring to other general counsels. It's really leverage your network, and your network can be so many different things. I hate that word, network. Your relationships, right? Like leaning into your relationships can often provide so much value for both sides at different times. And so it's the process, Tyler. I tell people it's the process. It's not the end result.
Tell us about the process that led you to Egon. Did they find you? Did you find them? How did you find this sort of next great adventure?
Well, Fifth Wall was the individual at Fifth Wall who I really credit to kind of bringing me over to the firm is someone that I had actually met through Fifth Wall when I was at Fifth Wall. And what I really appreciated about him, and he's amazing, is he really spent that whole year checking in with me, thinking about me, understanding kind of where I was in my career, answering my emails. And throughout that year, I developed a relationship with him that was very valuable for me as I thought about my next steps. And it was very generous of him to do it. About 6 or 7 months in to my sabbatical, he actually called me about a general counsel opportunity that Egon Zehnder had been running. And it was in Los Angeles, and it was right up my wheelhouse. And he said, would you be interested in going to chat with them? Long story short is through that process of interviewing with that company, he started really listening to the types of things that I was so drawn to in my next move. And those were kind of people. Those were relationships. Those were impact. Those were making a difference. And I don't know, maybe over the course of many conversations, at one point he asked me, you keep talking about people and impact and relationships, not, settling lawsuits and real estate deals and, and M&A. Have you ever thought of doing, going into leadership advisory and recruiting? And, if I'm being completely honest, my initial reaction was no. But look, he wasn't at all pushy. He was incredibly gracious. And,
Mhm.
honestly, after a 6-month soul searching process and conversations with the firm that I knew very little about, I fell in love with the model. I fell in love with the people. I fell in love with what they do. And I
Mhm.
truly believe that there's a massive amount of impact and opportunity for firms like Egon Zehnder to really make a difference in people's lives and in company lives.
Was it scary to step sort of off of that very linear track and not
No,
take it?
no. Sorry. Of course, it was scary. It was incredibly scary. It was many late nights talking about how, after 17 years or 16 years practicing,
Yeah,
I was going to completely change course. It was probably one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make. And let me tell you, without getting too transparent, there were certainly trade offs, short term financial trade offs,
sure.
that I had to wrestle with. But fundamentally, like I kept telling myself, and I love to tell my GCs this, there are way smarter and better attorneys than me. Okay. But I'm not awful. Right.
Sure.
But I
I
believe
don't
that,
doubt that.
I mean, like, you know, people who are somewhat intelligent or smart at any point in that spectrum can do so many different things often. And I
Mhm.
just wanted to be very true to myself in that moment. And my husband was a massive support. And for me,
Mhm.
it was about, there wasn't a single person at Egon Zehnder that I met, and I had met almost 30, if you can
Mhm.
believe it, that I didn't like. It was global. It
Yeah.
appealed to, like, the first generation immigrant in me. It
Uh-huh.
was, a bunch of very smart former operators that were very well educated that come in to help make big decisions for big companies with respect to talent, which frankly, in my opinion, is the most important part
Mhm.
of a company's path. Um, and it just really resonated with me. And so I took the jump. I figured, worst case scenario, I go beg my former peers for a job. But I'm over a year in now, and I don't have any regrets.
Tell us a little bit about what all the firm does, or sort of what all you offer, because I think people understand, okay, Aegon's an executive recruiting firm and they, place talent, right? But there's also a bunch of other sort of services that you offer as well, around sort of advisory and leadership and coaching and succession planning. And so talk to us about that. Tell us what the firm does.
Absolutely. So, you know, people are, I guess, like me, typically think about recruiting as just transactional search. I
Right.
would say that Aegon Zehnder is different from that perspective because we offer a whole suite of services that really resonated for me as a former practitioner around, board placement, CEO, CFO, C-suite placement, team development, right?
Mhm.
Almost reviews of talent, board effectiveness. So basically, the idea is search is only one way to solve human capital issues in an organization. There could
Yep.
be other things going on. So those types of leadership advisory assessments are part of what we do for larger organizations, team building type work.
Uh-huh.
So I think what I love about Aegon is it's incredibly customizable when it comes to the search plus type work
Mhm.
we do. And especially having kind of been in that seat in my prior life and worked in house in my prior life, I can definitely see how that mix of, and I've seen how that mix of former operator meets search,
Mhm.
results in a lot of benefit, both for candidates, right? Much easier to talk to somebody in a field that you formerly practiced in, and also clients.
We're going to get into the part that everyone's been waiting for, which is sort of like tactically. Let's say that I'm an executive and I'm looking for a new opportunity. How would Aegon find me? How do I get on your radar or the firm's radar?
So there's a lot of different ways. I would say the best way, obviously, is via, a warm introduction through someone
Hmm.
who knows someone at Aegon Zehnder or any other search firm.
Hmm.
I would say one of the things that was very much a learning experience for me is the importance of brand, right? And
Yeah.
so I would say for someone like me who wasn't schooled in social media as much, LinkedIn is a really great way to tell your story. And one of the things I love to tell general counsels about how to get found or how to get seen
Yeah.
is make sure your LinkedIn profile tells your story.
Hmm.
Not that it just provides where you've worked over the
Yep.
last 15, 20 years, but it tells the story of who you are and who you want to be,
Yep.
right? Because in a lot of ways, the more you can show that on LinkedIn, the more likely you are to be called about an opportunity that is very interesting to you.
Hmm.
Um, and one of the other kind of less obvious ways I would say is, oftentimes GCs or any other executives will call when they're ready to move. They'll say, I'm so sick and tired of my job. I'm going to jump off a cliff. Like it's time for me to move. But
Yeah.
the reality is these jobs often take so long to find, and there aren't
Hmm.
many of them. And so the earlier you can foster opportunities to get to know executive search firm recruiters, the more likely you are to get those calls, even if you're not looking now, right
Yep.
down the line. So I guess, how do you do that? Um, think a little bit about being a little bit more of a GC plus, for example. Like if I were going back to my former self, I might think, okay, I am playing in the legal lane, but
Yep.
talent does matter too. What kind of talent insights am I seeing from the market?
Hmm.
What are firms seeing in terms of compensation trends?
Hmm.
Similar to the way you might network with law firms
Hmm.
whose services you might want to use, take the opportunity to learn, bring those executive search firms to your company, have them meet with your CHRO, your C-suite, develop relationships that run deeper than just that transactional. I'm looking for a job. Here's my resume. What do you
Yeah.
have going
Yep.
on? Because it's almost human nature, right? At the end of the day, when I've got a public company GC search or I've
Hmm.
got a private equity backed GC search, the first place I'm most likely to tap are
Hmm.
people that I've known for a while because I'm much
Sure.
more comfortable putting forward people who I have a relationship with than those I've met just on this search, right? And so I feel like that's part of it. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Not always, but that's
Yep.
part of it, especially if the person is perfect for the role.
Yep. We've talked a little bit about personal branding. I love that tip about telling your story on LinkedIn. Anything else that you would recommend as folks think about positioning themselves to be known in sort of an authentic way by exec recruiters?
The best advice I could give to a general counsel is know exactly what you want
Hmm.
and be very modest about how you play that. But
Yeah.
it's okay to say, I'm looking for X. It's much more effective to say, I'm looking for X than to say, well, I was at Simpson and Cravath for 7 years doing M&A. Then I went to a private equity backed company that in the ed tech space, for example. And so now I'm looking for my next gig. That's
Right.
much less effective than I'm really energized by ed tech. I do
Right.
it in my spare time. I'm very knowledgeable about the policies in the space. I would love strategic introductions to people like that if I could ever be a resource myself to folks that are looking there, because then
Hmm.
you become somebody that I would immediately think about in an ed tech search, as
Right.
opposed to having all these skills or this big toolbox of skill sets that could potentially work.
Hmm.
Um, but I tell people when we get hired, and when I say we, I don't mean just Egon Zehnder. We get hired to solve a specific need in the
Hmm.
search strategy, and the closer we can get to the bullseye of that need, right? The happier our clients are, and the
Yep.
happier our candidates are, right?
Yep.
So hopefully that's a little bit of context for you.
That's super helpful. Let's say that you're an exec and you've started to build relationships with a variety of firms and you actually get into an interview process that's being run by one. What are your tips for success? How do you make sure that you sort of nail the process with the exec search firm?
With the C-suite, it's funny because qualifications oftentimes become table stakes. Because
Yeah.
even for me, as I got into this new world of recruiting, and it was awesome to see all these amazingly smart, successful people
Hmm.
that are also fund general counsels or were fund general counsels of bigger funds. I think the best advice I could give is transparency
Hmm.
and high EQ. And what
Yeah.
that means is respond. There's no game to be played, right?
Yep.
Be available, be transparent. If you're interested in the job, say it. If you're not
Yeah.
interested in the job, say it, right? At
Mhm.
the end of the day, when you think about the type of search we do, it's a relationship
Mhm.
business. And so thinking beyond just, that doesn't sound interesting to me, no thank you, or I'm going to wait a week to respond, to wait a minute, this is a firm that is doing searches, not just this one, but many more,
Yeah.
bringing that EQ to the table, bringing that thoughtfulness to the table, offering to be a source in other areas and being helpful back, I think are kind of the little things that go a really long way to building that trust, building that relationship, and frankly, through that process, allowing the recruiter to get to know you,
Right.
right? Because when that trust is built, that trust translates. And
Yep.
so it becomes a story, it becomes a way to really genuinely tell the client, these are qualities I've seen in this person over
Mhm.
years, that I know would be accretive to your business. And so
Right.
the more you can bring your most authentic self to the process, the better.
What are you seeing today around sort of virtual or in-person interviewing? I mean, and I think I think a lot of folks maybe struggle a little bit with the virtual aspect because they worry that they can't get that EQ across, or it's harder to, or any tips that you would have for folks who maybe get into a virtual process as opposed to an in-person one too.
It's such a good question. And I would say that over the last 6 months, my personal experience has
Hmm.
been that the world is very much accelerating and moving back
Yeah.
to kind of that in person, the importance of in person. I
Hmm.
would say whenever you can, find an opportunity to meet whatever relationship you're trying to develop in person. It just helps. It helps so much in not only understanding kind of a person's style, the way they operate, the way they communicate, but also I think in developing trust and a
Yeah.
certain level of professional intimacy that you just cannot duplicate, in my opinion, virtually. Um, but you know, best advice I can give, I guess, is more kind of what I'm seeing in the market, which is
Uh-huh.
that in-person trend is continuing pretty strong and is becoming a differentiator in success for candidates. I would say kind of the openness and the ability as an executive to kind of be there, sit at the table, and be excited about that prospect when it comes to
Hmm.
building team engagement, building a collaborative executive team is something that I'm personally seeing more of, and something that
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised, continued in that direction.
If a candidate's lucky enough to get to the offer
Mhm.
stage, what have you seen in terms of setting yourself up for success in actually negotiating the offer and maybe getting what you want out of that process?
It's funny, had you asked me this question 2 years ago, I would
Uh-huh.
have told you it's a negotiation. I would have told you, you bring your best negotiation skills to bear because they're gonna, if they want you to join them, you'll get your best offer. And I
Hmm.
would say that that is 100% in my experience untrue. I would say
Interesting.
that in these searches, because you realize you're one of potentially many,
Hmm.
that the best way to manage your comp expectations is to be A, transparent,
Hmm.
and B, consistent. And when
Hmm.
I mean manage comp expectations, I mean it's okay to tell people what it is you'd want to
Right.
move, and that will help make the process and the negotiation on the offer much more seamless. And it
Hmm.
will avoid, kind of the wrong energy coming into a process where you're, ready to accept an offer and embark on a new journey. I would say the more transparent you can be with your executive recruiter about what it is you want, and the more that story stays the same throughout the search, the more
Hmm.
credibility you build, not just for that search, but for others, that you're not going to go in at the last minute, and say X or Y.
Hmm.
And also that you have a little bit of an awareness that, usually in talent, I mean, the client does have choices, right? And at the end of the day, the more you can make yourself, you know, appear and really be that team player, that person who obviously has, thresholds and needs that you're entitled to have. But the more you can kind of show through that transparency, that credibility, that kind of understated behavior of, this is how much I'm interested in the company. I really want to develop a relationship here and grow, but this is what I'd need. And this is, important to me. You just can come off as much less demanding, and it's much more palatable in the process, in my opinion.
Very, very tactically speaking. I mean, I've often heard advice from folks that say, look, you have different buckets of things that you might want as a part of negotiating the offer, whether it's cash or options or title or certain terms in the contract around severance or double trigger or what have you. And you have to be willing to give on some of those and push hard on others. Like taking your sort of advice of not entering this as an aggressive negotiation. What do you think about that sort of like that approach of having things that you want to push on versus things you're willing to give up, right? Like maybe I'm willing to give up the title a little bit for more options. Is that good advice, or is that the wrong way to think about this?
I might be a little bit more macro about it. I might be like, I might talk to the recruiter about it. Like if I had a candidate who said, look, I want, some job certainty, I want equity valued at X, and I want, but base and bonus, no less than X. I would say it's okay to be transparent with your recruiter in that process. And if you trust your recruiter enough, your recruiter will be able to kind of translate kind of that balance of what it is she feels or he feels having gotten to know you with the executives in a way where hopefully they can assist in getting to the right result. Now, at a certain point, the candidate will be finalizing that package with the company. But avoiding surprises, being highly transparent about where the pain points are, can really go a long way in getting to the end game, in my view, in a smooth way.
As we start to wrap up, the whole sort of theme is around what you wish you'd known when you were a GC. Anything else that you would want to add to that now that you're an exec recruiter and sort of sitting on the other side of the table?
I think the best advice I can give lawyers is less about being an executive search firm and more about just being so interested and so connected to my former peers and having gone through, that journey of growth, that journey of changing jobs, that journey of what's next. I mean, the best advice I can give, just having sat here after the process of 1 year, is it's okay to follow your energy. It's okay to take risks and make change. I think kind of me sitting here is less of a how do search firms think and what can search firms think about GCs? And for me personally, more, how can I be a resource to general counsels who are often, one of the smartest executives kind of who have such exposure to the C-suite and to the business. And, if you don't love it, there are other paths. And I hope that if nothing else on this podcast, as I talk to, and if one person were to listen to this, even it would be, it's okay to explore outside the box. It's okay to really lean into a process of change. It's okay to kind of leverage those skills and bring them elsewhere. And this isn't me telling lawyers don't practice anymore. Absolutely not. It's about me telling general counsels, lean into your superpowers, lean into what energizes you. A lot of you have earned it. And I think if I can be an example for general counsels of what's different or what can be different or what they, that to me is much more successful than the placements I'm making and how they can, benefit from that, which of course is all part of it too.
That's the theme of the podcast. So
right?
That's great. Maybe your answer will be very similar, but I do like to ask folks, and this is sort of like the traditional closing question, which is if you could look back when you were a lawyer just getting started out of law school at the firm, something that you know now that you wish you'd known back then.
Oh God, this is really, really hard. I would have probably taken a little bit more time off. I think it's really important for people between college and law school, if they're not visionaries, I certainly was not one, to kind of sit in the seat of the profession they choose. And I think that if there was one piece of advice I would have given myself perhaps a little sooner than law school, it's go spend 6 months living and breathing the work you want to do, because you can't really measure or understand that piece of it. At least I couldn't when I was 22 in a way that I could understand it now. So I would say maybe I would have become a litigator. Maybe I would have decided to do public interest law. Maybe I would have, there's so many other things I potentially might have done. Now, I want to underscore that I have zero regrets. I think life is a journey, and I really enjoyed my experience and all the twists and turns it took. But I think it might have been, helpful even for my own children when I think about their growth and kind of their decisions and the big decisions they're going to have to make. It's think about what energizes you. Double down on figuring out whether that truly does, and follow your path in a way that leads you to your personal version of success.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of The Abstract, Joelle. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me, Tyler, and I hope I didn't disappoint you.
No, this was fantastic. Excellent for your first podcast, and excellent just as a matter of fact across all of our episodes. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Take care.
And to all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd recommend that you give my interview from earlier in the season with Richard Hsu, Managing Director at Major Lindsay in Africa, a listen. We talk about how to work with recruiters and find your next role. You can also subscribe so you can get notified as soon as we release a new episode. And if you liked this one, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a rating or a comment. See you all next week.